So Greg Land has volunteered to help guide this, and of course, he's our T100 rep or sponsor. Greg serves as the global industry leader for travel and hospitality for AWS, and his responsibility is all of the go-to-market strategy, business development, and industry solution development for any kind of hospitality accommodation, lodging, casino, cruise, etc. Brian Kirkland was instrumental in helping us put together our chairs. And Brian's the Chief Information Officer for Choice Hotels International. There he oversees the company's information IT, the whole organization, and is responsible for leading the overall IT strategy as well. Infrastructure, development, all of that aligning with Choice's business objectives and strategic roadmap. And with that, gentlemen, if you want to take over, Greg, I am going to stop my share as soon as I put my controls back on and hand it over to you. And I am going to go off screen. I'm going to stop my camera so that we don't distract the recording.
Can everybody see my screen okay?
Yeah, yes. And please do turn your cameras off during the presentation itself and then turn them back on. Not you, Greg, or Brian, of course.
Right. Okay, great. So anyway, thank you guys for this opportunity. As Frank was saying, as the leadership team for this community of interest was talking at the end of the year, we thought it was a good time to kind of reintroduce what's happening with AI across the industry. Now, some of you may remember, gosh, almost 2 years ago, we kicked off this community of interest. And one of the very first meetings, I did kind of an AI 101 session. And back then, we were just learning about large language models, foundation models, really just the tip of the iceberg of kind of where things were going with what was called generative AI. And when you look back over the past 12 months, so much has happened in this space. The pace of technological change just continues to accelerate, and it's a bit overwhelming for a lot of people. And so I know on this call, we have a mix of technical and non-technical folks. So we're going to try to keep this somewhere balanced in the middle. We want to speak from a business use case perspective, but also educate everyone on the technologies, where the technologies are going, and kind of where we're starting to see them used. Now, the way we're going to do this is kind of like a fireside chat. Thank you, Brian, for joining me. I really wanted to have a hotel representative on here to keep this real world and how all this is applying to a hotel company, a hotel management company. So I'm going to kind of speak from the industry perspective broadly across travel and hospitality, because in some cases, the travel side of the industry is pacing ahead of the hospitality side, but I think we'll all kind of follow the same lead. So I'm going to kind of talk through what's transpired over the past year, how these technologies have advanced, how they're being used broadly across the industry. And then I've asked Brian to kind of join and give the hotel perspective. He can speak from things he can openly share of what Choice is doing. But Brian, the reason I think you were such a great person for this, you are also a Global Tech 100 member and have been very active there, but also the fact that Choice was an early adopter on many of these technologies, but also you have your own proprietary CRS and PMS. So you're dealing with some of this with your own proprietary systems, but you also use a lot of off-the-shelf tech vendor product as well. And full disclosure, Brian is an AWS customer. So he and I work very closely together. So it's great to have you join me for this, Brian.
Yeah, thanks for having me.
And I've asked Brian just to jump in and interrupt me where he wants to add color commentary. So kind of look at him as the color commentary from the hotel perspective. So just to set kind of a benchmark, and any of you that have seen me present, I use this slide a lot as kind of a foundation point to start from as we talk about 2025. But there was a Skift research piece done fourth quarter of 2024 that asked broadly executives across travel and hospitality where they planned on implementing AI, machine learning, generative AI over 2024, 2025. And this is kind of where the priorities were. And, early on, we did see, a lot of effort around customer service, a lot of contact center modernization, a lot of people deploying it for personalizing some marketing and advertising, but a lot of it was applied to IT modernization and specifically in hospitality, because most of us across the hospitality industry were still getting our customer and property data in order to really go too aggressive with anything generative AI. Now, you'll see these priorities have shifted quite rapidly over the last 12 months. And a lot of that is because, to all of our surprise, the consumer adoption of a lot of these new technologies has been at a much faster pace than we ever expected. Now, just some quick headlines. And Brian, here's where at the end of this, I'll ask you to chime in on kind of some of what you've seen as well, just from the perspective of Choice Hotels. But when you look at this past year, and this is all stuff that just happened in the last 12 months, we quickly saw AI chatbots out there. And that was the thing that really kind of rolled out very quickly, especially with contact centers. But then we saw the rise of AI agents, and where you could start having these autonomous AI agents run processes for you. Everybody thought that was going to be what really disrupted the OTA market. And you would start having these agents that consumers could access broadly, like ChatGPT and Perplexity and things like that. And not to our surprise, we did see one of these come up very quickly in April. And I know most of you are very much in touch with what's going on, but this was a real pivot point, especially for hospitality. In the month of April, we saw Perplexity launch a recommendation engine using an LLM. They partnered with SelfBook for the hotel booking engine. They sponsored with TripAdvisor for the destination content, and they partnered with Stripe for the online payment solution. And you could go in and, using natural language search, just ask it any question. It would not only come back with hotel recommendations down to the property level, but there was a book it button that you could book it right from their screen, and it would process it through SelfBook and Stripe. They supplemented it with the destination information from TripAdvisor. This was a pivot point that really caused the OTAs to shake a little bit, because this was the first thing we saw in market in full production that potentially could disrupt an OTA model. On top of that, we saw a lot of things with generative AI starting to come out, not only chatbots, but contact center changes. We started seeing things like property descriptions, property images, all being generated and personalized on websites and in booking engines. And then also around the same time as Perplexity, we launched at AWS, or at Amazon, we launched the Alexa Plus, which has the generative AI capabilities on the back end. So when you think about how consumers are using generative AI, and now you have it plugged into these voice search engines like Alexa and Siri and things like that, this now really kind of helped the consumer break through that fear of voice search. We were all hesitant to put voice devices in rooms because most consumers wouldn't want to think they were being listened to. And I think we all kind of recognized pretty quickly our iPhones and Google phones are listening to us all the time anyway. And Instagram and Facebook are tracking everything you look at and everything you say. And so we quickly saw that things like this were going to break through voice search, but also some of this came from just, we're getting quite lazy as consumers. And to have to type out that whole long prompt of what you're asking for in your request, it's easier just to speak it. And if you're like me, I see more and more people walking through airports, walking through grocery stores, speaking into their phones for prompts, for searches, for text, voice to text. So I think we've broken that barrier with voice search as well. And the creepiness of voice interaction has gone away as well this past year.
Greg, just and to maybe add on
Yeah,
here, kind
please.
of stepping back and looking at the 10,000-foot view for all of these. As an industry, what you saw is the LLMs are all competing with each other at the same time. We're all trying to compete on their platforms, and they're all attacking this with very, very different strategies. Perplexity, I put in now this to throwing spaghetti at the wall and see what sticks. If you're an LLM picking self-book first, who only offered up a few hotels, was just let's try something and get out there and try to win. They're trying to beat Google. You look at Anthropic, they're not even concerned with B2C. They're all about B2B. They got a whole different path of innovation that they're going down that affects the way we interact and leverage their platforms. You look at OpenAI, they were actually really smart with their agent, where you can go through a web view agent interaction because it decoupled us having to integrate directly with them to allow potential transactions and booking and data searching and all those things to happen on their platform. So it was an easy button for them. It's not a perfect one, obviously. And then they launched the the application environment that they're going down. They're all trying different things. They're all attacking this differently. And the whole industry is trying to figure out how do we compete? How do we play? How do we integrate? How do we show up? Because the big effect was to search and the way that we lost traffic to the LLMs. And so there was a lot of scramble in 2025 is just the easiest way to describe that. We as an industry are trying really hard to work closely with the LLMs and drive some sanity out of it. We do have some good traction with T100. If you're not part of T100 or not, your teams aren't engaged with T100, we are getting the right conversations with the right people to start to demonstrate value. But the industry is still frantically trying to keep up. Behind the scenes, all of the companies, management, hoteliers, everybody is realizing data is a core element that needs to be cleaned up, fixed up. And if you're not already in the cloud, you have a massive journey in front of you because everything that's happening on all of these requires your data to be in a good state. So it was definitely a year of scramble drill, a lot of board panic, a lot of industry guesses going on, and everybody trying to figure out what does tomorrow look like. But the teams that are already in the cloud, the teams that are already invested in working towards this path, there's absolutely stuff you can be doing to innovate with with the way things are going.
Yeah, no, absolutely. And I think the Perplexity pilot that launched in April was also a learning for a lot of our hotels to say, wow, I've got to be in that game. I've got to be able to connect with folks like Perplexity and directly with the LLMs. And we'll get into some of the technologies behind that on the next slide. But just to round this out, the fear of the OTAs and how they were going to be disrupted caused them to quickly respond. And so in August, we saw TikTok and Booking.com collaborate and launch a booking path from a TikTok influencers video where you can also book straight through, and it takes you through a booking path with Booking.com. All that being said, we also saw the CEO of OpenAI in December announce that they plan on having, or I guess November, they plan on having hotel booking capabilities directly from OpenAI as well. So they're all looking to Brian's point, they're all looking to quickly collapse the connection points here, standardize this, and move as quickly as possible. But all that being said, we got to look at consumer adoption. I mean, this is where it is because consumers have adopted these capabilities much quicker than we ever thought. And I've always followed retail and banking trends because we've always tended to see retail and banking be where consumers adopt new technologies first, especially self-service technologies, and then travel and hospitality kind of followed 12 to 18 months behind that. And the consumer expected the same capabilities. Well, this is just the opposite. Over the past 18 months, travel and hospitality has been the number one use case that this is applied to. And we all know the history with GDSs and travel agents and everything, and how everybody expected that to shift quickly with OTAs. For some reason, consumers are not having the same fear here. They're going out and just blindly using these tools, taking the recommendations at face value. But what it does is we lose all traceability of if your hotel gets recommended from one of these agents, you don't really know where they went and booked that. Did they call your contact center? Did they go book through an OTA? Did they come book direct through your website? So it does kind of really kill our traceability. And that's where MCP and agents and the hotels getting directly involved in how they connect to the LLMs and manage this flow is going to be absolutely necessary. And we'll get into that in a couple of slides here. But this was back from earlier in the year. And at this point, we saw in February, we were seeing 24% of consumers were consulting these public generative AI tools. The last number I saw at the end of the year, it's close to 60% now. almost 60% of people. And the trajectory is following about the same path as we saw for social media adoption 10 years ago. So we don't expect this to stall. We expect the trajectory to continue. And you see that giant 83% there. The satisfaction level from consumers using these tools is really relatively high. And they're digging into things like picking the destination, learning about food and beverage options, but they're definitely digging into airline and hotel recommendations as part of these tools as well. So we've got to make sure that we're connecting into these. And Brian,
One,
I know your
one,
team has done a lot of this work, but love your perspective on this relative to the consumer adoption and how the hotels tap into this.
it's 100% real. Everybody in the industry in the world actually saw an immediately drop in traffic, organic traffic, as soon as these things launched. Interesting conversation with, I think it was OpenAI, but don't quote me on that in case I'm remembering wrong which conversation it was. They supported this data point here that Greg's sharing, where the number one thing being prompted about is actually travels and hotels and like booking opportunities. So I asked them, I said, why is it that hospitality is not at the top of your radar then when it comes to actually working with the industry to drive transformation? And the short answer was because retail dollar amount's much bigger right now. So we've got to get the commerce piece of that right, and then we'll pivot. But the users are asking for this. This is where they're indexing, definitely. And we're seeing that as well in the way people are approaching our systems, as well as what we're hearing directly from all of the different LLMs, and we're talking with all of them.
Yeah. So let's take a look back on kind of where we got to where we are and what the new capabilities are, and kind of take this as kind of your glossary for AI terms and kind of how they've progressed chronologically. But these AI technologies have been around for 20 years. A lot of people have been using it in their businesses. It started out almost 20 years ago, just around data visibility and being able to look at both structured and unstructured data and visualize it in graphical form to really better understand it. Then we got into a period of basic modeling, and that's where things like machine learning came along. And it wasn't until maybe about 6 or 7 years ago, we really started seeing AI analytics come up. And this was where you could really, we used to use the term big data quite often. And it was AI and natural language search that really allowed us to then start getting our arms around big data. And this was this period of advanced analytics. But where we really saw some big leaps, especially in our industry, was when we started using it for predictive analytics. And Brian, I know the team at Choice uses it a lot for predictive analytics. I know you have a whole analytics team that leverages this. This is where I see it used the most over travel and hospitality before we got into the age of generative AI 3 years ago, was it really gave us a better way to mechanize forecast information, pull in third-party data, pull in unstructured data, and really apply data science to better understanding what we thought the trends might be. This was used aggressively with airlines for capacity planning, schedule planning. A lot of hotel companies have used it for on top of their revenue management system to pull in other data attributes, but then also to use it for forecasting development. Where do we build our next property? Where do we have gaps versus what the market demands are in different MSAs and things like that. So, but Brian,
100%.
I know you guys have used it a lot in that space too.
Absolutely. I mean, everything you described, fraud analytics, all kinds of places. We've been using analytics and deep learning on AI, ML for decades. I think the interesting thing on this graph that maybe it's a future iteration of this, Greg, it's almost like once you pivot into the Gen AI and agentic AI, everything you've done in the past, important groundwork and important framework for success in the future. But I would argue that nobody has enough data and the data in an accessible way that they will want it to be as powerful as they could be with agentic and generative AI. And so there's almost a flywheel of you need to start capturing more data. You need to start exposing more data. You need data that you didn't even think you needed in the past because now you have a lot more power available to you to leverage that data and do something meaningful with it. Where in the past you were limited by the constraints of whatever your analytics team's capacity was. Now you can build an army of agents to go off and just look at raw data. And so there's a data race that needs to be happening at everybody's company to figure out how do I get more of it? How do I get more of it exposed?
Yeah, and just how do you get your arms around it and really use it? But no, that's a good point, Brian, because we really are kind of reaching that point where it really does kind of circle back because we're generating new data. There's new data that's being created out of these LLMs that we have access to now. There is the results of all these predictive and advanced analytics that become data attributes you can use in future
Mhm.
models. So you're exactly right. But it really has been just, when we pivoted to generative AI, I think that's when a lot of folks' minds really were blown with what was capable here. And the big change there, and I'm just kind of repeating some of where we started this with this community of interest 2 years ago, was generative AI and the large language models. And the difference here is all that data we've been collecting for years, and now that it's finally organized in a way to use it, and it's in the cloud where you can really efficiently and effectively get through it in an appropriate amount of time. It was generative AI applying these large language models where you could really go through and in microseconds analyze billions of different combinations to come up with what was the appropriate response to something. And so, but as part of generative AI, we also saw great advances in natural language search, analysis of visual information like images and videos, and the ability to create from scratch images and videos and new data. So it was in that early wave of generative AI that we started seeing things like personalized property descriptions. I had several of my customers really go down the path of starting to create personalized and customized property images. We have whole suites of products now out there where you can create videos, all just using all AI images. So it really was leveraged initially a lot on the creative side. Um, and then just this past year, we saw the advent of agentic AI or AI agents. And this is where, for the first time ever, without human interface, you have a fully autonomous um, program that can go out and make decisions and activate a process on its own. And we'll get into this a little bit more and break it down because agentic AI is really what's kind of leading the way now. And there's a lot of elements within agentic AI that'd be good for everybody here to understand.
And
Any other
Greg,
thoughts on that page, Brian? Yeah.
I know this is on your next slide a little bit, but there's some questions coming in around like the impacts or the effects on privacy with that data. And I think the short answer, it's extremely important that everybody out there is paying attention to what's being built with generative AI and making a decision for your company about how you want to attack that. At Choice, our strategy has been to focus internally first. We're not putting it in front of guests yet while we figure out how this works. We're doing a ton of stuff for our internal users. We're doing a ton of work for our franchisees. It's not public news because it's not guest facing, but we're working towards and learning the effects of these systems in a controlled environment where we have a human in the middle that can discern. At the same time, we're standing up governance internally that says, hey, same rules apply with regards to PII, PCI, all those types of things. But now, how can an agent be manipulated? How can hallucinations affect business outcomes? What's the governance we need to have in place around the way we use these things? So you definitely need to stand up, focus on governance in AI, and make sure that there's people that are actively engaged, not just assuming the old controls and old systems are enough because there's new threats, new risks on the horizon, and your strategy about how you attack things will have a big play in how much risk you're taking on as a company and what your board is going to be asking you around those risk questions.
Yeah, and that really is what drove this progression on this next page, Brian. You know, 2023, when this all first came out, everybody really kind of hesitated. A lot of that hesitation did come from the boards and the investment groups that said, "Hey, don't just go chase the shiny object." But also on the hospitality side of the industry, there was also a lot of hesitation because most everybody knew their customer data was not clean and in order. They had lots of things to look at around data privacy and how their data is secured and just ongoing data hygiene. So 2023 was the year that we saw, especially in hospitality, just a lot of POCs, a lot of lessons learned, and seeing where we needed to kind of clean up data. However, I will say 2023, the OTAs didn't hesitate. We saw Expedia and Booking both jump into this with both feet. We saw Airbnb jump into this with both feet and use generative AI to really start rethinking their user interaction on their website. So we saw those guys progress pretty quickly. With or without the data, they were at a point they needed to really start transforming their experience. 2024 was the first year we really started seeing some stuff put in full production, both from the OTAs as well as with the airlines. At this point, you articulated, Brian, already. On the hotel side of the equation, we really were still just using this for internal use. We saw a lot of use of generative AI for code modernization, where we were still catching up on some of our IT modernization and IT efficiencies. But we did see OTAs and some airlines progress some things into production in 2024. 2025, this past year is when we really just first started seeing tangible business results come out of some of these. Even some of the early POCs from 2023 that went into production in 2024, it was really 2025 that we really started seeing some real business value delivered that was measurable. And at the back of this deck, we may not get time to go through all of them, but in the back of this deck, I put several case studies of real customers across travel and hospitality and what it was they implemented, what the challenge was, what were they able to capture? Was it 30% reduction in talk time on a contact center? Was it 24% improvement in customer acquisition through their website because of personalized content that was generative AI created? But really, we're just kind of at the point where some of these have been in place long enough that you can really capture business value of something that's been put in production.
I think the only thing I would add to that is there's low-hanging fruit that you can go chase and do right now, especially if you're an Amazon customer and you can just use like Bedrock out of the gates and pick the right model and go to town. And then there's enablement platforms that are out there. Like Amazon just launched their Agent Core platform at re:Invent. We were one of the companies working with them. We've already got it live, and we've already got agents and code working on Agent Core in our environment. And so those types of capabilities are just about making people move faster, helping people move faster to get to that business value. My caution to folks is don't wait for perfect, though. There's a reason we aren't guest facing. All the comments in the Q&A are tied to it. Like there's a lot of privacy and all those concerns you have to address. We're focused on the ones that we have better answers on right now, and we're more ready as a company to address the employee and the franchisee, and we're running. And as fast as you can go, there's opportunity out there to be gathered with your current state, but continuing to invest in your platform so that you can enable future speed and delivery.
Yeah, absolutely. And on this page, I just kind of show you the progression we should expect. This is an airline example because the airlines are pacing ahead of us. But this is the direction that that these systems are going. And you can kind of see how it translates on the bottom to how the user interfaces with this. But when you look at, based on some of the terms we just talked about, to the left, you see where there's more human oversight. And this is where most of these are starting. And we call them generative AI assistants here, but they're basically just super duper chatbots. And they're rules-based. You still have code telling them what to do. They're not quite as autonomous as like what you hear about with some of the agentic AI stuff. So that's kind of where things start. And that kind of lends itself to what we show at the bottom half of the screen as a smart assistant. It's got an LLM in the background. It's still looking at billions of combinations of recommendations. And based on what your prompt is asking for, it's bringing forward the best answer to that. But when you get into generative AI agents, this is where you start getting to things that are a little smarter. And you've got some of the autonomous agents broken down in a way that can go and pull together different components of this and bring it back. Now, what we're going to see, and I've got an architecture slide here in a second, or kind of a graphic slide here in a second, that kind of shows how it's progressing with airlines. But what we're going to see is agents broken down in a very simplistic form where you may have an AI agent just for researching destinations. You may have an AI agent just for looking at excursions or activities in a particular destination. Then you may have an agent that's just about the planning process end to end. You may have an agent that's just about property recommendations, an agent that's just about shopping what your transportation opportunities are to get there. And then you're going to have a super agent that brings all that together. And based on what the consumer asks for, it'll go pull together the 2 or 3 agents that are needed to deliver on that. And that's where you're going to see these come together into these smart helpers, or you'll hear them talked about as AI concierges and things like that. But when you get to the far right of this line on top, you get to the full agentic AI systems. That's where they're fully autonomous, and you have the multi-agent system like I was just describing, and that's where you have less and less human oversight. Now, what we're going to talk about here in a second is MCP. You've probably heard of that. Stands for Model Context Protocol. When we get to this level of systems, you have to have Model Context Protocol in place, because what Model Context Protocol does is it allows your system, your backend system, to speak to these large language models and give it some context of what kind of answer you're looking for. I mean, one of the early concerns was with LLMs was you get back hallucinations. And that's because when it's sorting through billions of combinations, if you're not explicit enough in your prompt, it may bring back something that doesn't quite answer your question because you weren't specific enough. What Model Concept Protocol does is it allows you to program in, it's a hotel recommendation we're looking for, here's the requirements, here's the prompt. And so it does give it a little more context. Now, this is another example of how quickly things are moving. Model Context Protocol was created by Anthropic, one of the LLM companies, December of 2024, just a little over a year ago. It became the pervasive way to translate between backend systems and LLMs throughout this past year. It's now progressed all the way to, it's now going to become open source, and I'll speak to that here at the end of this section. But MCP, Brian, I know you guys are using it. We've rolled out MCP services. I know there's a lot of work being done to put frameworks in place, because this is what's going to be necessary to connect your backend systems through to these AI agents, all the way through to the LLMs.
Yeah, we MCP servers is massively adopted. I will say we took the build it and they will come approach and just started standing up MCP servers for all of the things we thought would be relevant to an agent to be able to access. Wendy asked a great question. How do the LLMs know which ones to go to and know what's going out there? There's a lot of conversation and dialogue around that right now. And if I put my LLM hat on, they can never build a performant search when a person's typing into a chat agent or chatbot that's going to hit a million MCP servers real time and get answers and then decide the right answer to present back to the user. So there's got to be a solution that comes in that helps aggregate and kind of do some things in the middle. But that doesn't mean the industry shouldn't already be setting up MCP servers. You should be using them all over the place. In fact, I'm pushing that our work groups even consider MCP as a mechanism to get rid of having to have bespoke APIs between all the vendors and all the technology stack that we share in our overall ecosystem. It just is it's a translation layer on top of your existing APIs that agents understand and can figure out how to work together, as opposed to having to hard code and understand it one off all over the place. So it does have a lot of power that we should, as an industry, be leaning into.
Yeah. I'm going to cover a couple more slides, and then we're going to open it up for the open discussion. I want to get through two more things. And then at the back of this, I've got kind of the 12 prioritized use cases we're seeing across hospitality. And then I've got 4 or 5 real world case studies of travel and hospitality companies that are using this and the kind of results they've gotten. We're going to provide all these slides, and they're going to be available. Sandy will post this on the AHLA website along with the recording. So we'll make these slides available for you guys to see all that stuff after the fact. But we do want to get to the open discussion. But sticking with this airline example, because they're pacing ahead of us, this is kind of the hypothesized architecture for how we see things playing out in the airline industry. And this is all being orchestrated at the industry level. And this is where we've got to get our mindset to for hospitality. You know, Brian said already, the Global Tech 100 is starting to put some thought around this, starting to organize at an industry level, starting to drive conversations with the LLMs, because we do need to start thinking in these terms. But if you look at this example from an airline perspective, they're really getting aggressive on what they call modern airline retailing. And they have this vision of all these publicly available AI agents fueled by these LLMs going through this MCP aggregator layer, which would be at the industry level. And then that would be picked up by the MCP layer that each individual airline has. And that's how an airline would differentiate, is their offer engine, their experience engine, all their generative AI merchandising capabilities. That'll sit behind their own system, and they'll have their own MCP layer, but you'll have this standard infrastructure with these MCP aggregators in the middle that'll be at the industry level. So this is, I threw this out there because this is the mindset we need to start thinking with. We've got to get organized as an industry to see how we're going to leverage these capabilities going forward, because the consumer adoption is not stopping. And if we don't get ahead of this, right now it's tilting more in favor of the OTAs. It's tilting more in favor of anybody who's plugging directly into these LLMs. So we've got to think about our infrastructure at an industry level and how we plug into this. And then just to kind of round out how quickly this stuff is moving, MCP was created in December of 2024 by Anthropic. Agentic AI just became a thing over the past 12 months, and it's moved so quickly. This is now being rolled into a new foundation under the Linux Foundation. This is going to all be put out there with a single open source protocol. You can see the list of platinum members on the right that are launching this with Linux Foundation. It's AWS, Anthropic, Cloudflare, Google, Microsoft, OpenAI. This is the train is gone. It's moving very fast, and we need to engage with these agentic AI foundations. We need to think about how we address this from an industry perspective. And as Brian said, the Tech 100 is trying to lead the way on this, and I think we've got to get very aggressive with this. Now, at the back of this, like I said, we can dig into some of this if we have time during the open discussion, but I've got kind of the 12 most common use cases we're seeing out there, everything from guest experience to pricing agents. There's a lot in the advertising and marketing space where this stuff is being used. And then at the very back, I've got several different case studies that you can dig into here and really kind of see business results and things like that. But I'm going to stop there so we have 15 minutes for open discussion. We can refer back to any of these slides that we need to. But for now, I'll stop share so everybody can come back on video for some discussion.
And folks, if you'd like to ask a question, and I'll monitor the